Hey, so in this video we're going to discuss JavaScript and jQuery, kind of how they're related and what we use them for in our projects. This is by no means the end-all and beat-all of documentation. This is kind of just meant to give you a bit of an overview of what these are, and how we use them in our projects. So, jumping right in, I have this example HTML test page here. So the main thing that we use JavaScript and jQuery for is for interacting with what's called the DOM. Now, the DOM stands for the Document Object Model. And if we look, this kind of is a representation of the DOM that we have here. The DOM is not to be confused with the actual HTML code. Which is kind of like our blueprint for the DOM. The DOM is how the web page actually gets built in memory and then displayed on the page, which is a little bit of a technicality, kind of splitting hairs there, but I think it helps break this down. And so the difference being that, we can go ahead and, even though this HTML file says this is a test page, we can, if we wanted to mess with this in DevTools, we can change this to say test, right? And that's why the DOM is a more dynamic element than the index file or the HTML file that we're working with. So an example of how would we mess with this, right? In JavaScript, we can do document.get element by ID, and then it is going to be ID test. .enter HTML equals test. And here we actually overwrote what was in this h1 element with the content with this string right here, and so we were able to change that h1 tag, right? Now if we reload the page, we didn't actually edit the HTML file, obviously, so our changes go away. However, we could come in here and we could go script. We can paste this in here. I'm going to go ahead and reload. And here we see that what happens is this did not change, so it's still, this is a test page, right? This H1 right here. But what happens is the page gets loaded. It has, this is a test page. But then as soon as that gets rendered, imperceivably so, we can't see it. As soon as that gets rendered, this code gets executed, and this h1 tag, the contents of it gets changed to test. We can actually make this a little bit more dramatic, and we can go set timeout. We can make this 1 second pause. We're going to go ahead and save that, load it, 1 Mississippi, boom. And then it changes to test after 1 second, right? So that makes it a little bit more visible. And so one thing to note about JavaScript, and this is what we're using right here, is this is pure vanilla JavaScript. It does not require any third-party libraries. Pretty much every single browser, every modern browser supports this by default. And what's even better is, you can look and see if there are, you can check, like here we did document.get. You can see that there's actually a couple different functions that we can call here. We can do get element by ID. We can do get elements by name, get elements by tag name, in namespace. All these different options here. Alternatively, we can look at window. And we see window has a couple different options that we can use. One of those is inner height. Here we see 910, and that is actually, that represents the height of this window here. Oops, I resized it too much. We could see that it was at 910 in the upper right hand corner there. It shows up. So one thing so here, this is JavaScript, right? The thing to note is that jQuery is JavaScript, but JavaScript is not, I'm sorry, all JavaScript is valid jQuery, but all jQuery isn't really JavaScript. And so what I mean by that is jQuery is a library that is built in JavaScript that throws in some a slightly different syntax and allows us to reference elements on the page in a slightly different manner. And then they also have some boilerplate that it ships with to kind of make the job a little bit easier. So we can go on and get a jQuery CDN. We just get the latest minified version here. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to introduce this into our, and of course it didn't copy properly. I'm going to go ahead and copy it now. Introduce this into our document. I'm going to reload and see if we had any issues. Network lets us know that it loaded successfully. Alright, so we can start using it. Now, the big difference is, if you notice, when we wanted to reference this test element, I'm actually going to get rid of this code as well, but when we wanted to reference this test element, we had to do document.getElement by ID test.innerHTML, and so there was a lot of extra typing that we had to do there, right? I'm going to go ahead and save this again and reload it. With jQuery, if we're wanting to select an element in the DOM, we start with a $, right? And then we have to use whatever would be the CSS, whatever CSS tag we would use to access that element is one way to think of it, right? So if we wanted to get an element by ID, we would use the $, and then we would do whatever ID that we wanted to. So like in this example, it's going to be test. So we come here and we do $test.html test. And here we see that it changed dynamically there. If this were a class, we would use a period. So like here we can actually say class equals test. I'm going to go ahead and reload the page. And I'm going to show you that example. We would do the same opening $, and everything. Then we would go dot test. HTML is going to be test. And here it went ahead and changed. We could also just reference the tag itself. We could say h1, right? Because that's valid CSS. We would go h1.html demo. And then here it changed. One thing to note is on a page, we shouldn't have more than one h1, but it's kind of outside the scope of this video. We're going to do another h2 tag, and I'm going to show you with these two that say test. I'm going to say this is another test h2. I'm going to go ahead and reload it. So here we see on a page we have two h2 tags. If we use this and we say h2 HTML test, it affects all of the h2 elements. Okay, so I mean, this behaves just like we would CSS, right? If we introduced a CSS style, for instance, we could look at it here and go, this doesn't even have to be h2.test. We can just say h2 color is red, and it affects both of them as well. All right, so that's one thing to keep in mind when you're working with jQuery. It's how these items are referenced. I'm going to go ahead and, well, another thing that we can do is, if we just look at what gets returned by just doing this right here, just all we're doing is just saying h2 in this example, we can examine what it returns here, and it's actually giving us an array of elements. So we see that the first one is going to be this h2.test, and if we click on it, Chrome will let us know that this is the one that we're looking at. If we come here, the second one with an offset of 1, we click on that, Chrome will highlight this one, and it lets us know that this is the second element in that array. So this is useful. This can become useful if, for instance, we wanted to loop through these maybe and add specific data tags or something like that. We can reference the first one here just like an array if we did, if we gave it this syntax, and and we see that, okay, yeah, this is the first one that's getting returned. This is not necessarily the best form to do to manipulate it this way, but we could say accessing single element. Oops, I guess that actually is not correct. We would do dot first for that one, but that's outside of this video. So yeah, so this will return an array of elements if there are multiple ones, or it will just return the singular one. And there's a couple really common things that we would do with this. We can say h2.slideUp is a really common one, and that has this is a built-in jQuery thing. This is something that they throw in automatically as some boilerplate to kind of if we were going to use that, it was already there for us. This is also one of the reasons why on some projects when we're shooting for efficiency, we may not want to use jQuery because here was extra code that they had to load up in their browser that they didn't. If we're not going to use this functionality, they may not need it. So here you can see .slide down. We can do .hide. It's another really common one. And now we don't see them. We could do .show. Now we can see them. Those are all really common ones. And thankfully on jQuery, it's all pretty well documented. You can go on their website and they give you a bunch of examples of ways to interact with the DOM and manipulate elements. And often you can Stack Overflow has a wealth of information on stuff that you may want to do. So if you're wanting to fan stuff out, we did slide up and it slid the stuff up and kind of toggled it. If we wanted to go the other way, there's a syntax for doing that. And so in this next, moving on, we can look, and one area where jQuery really shines, I think it makes things look a whole lot easier to deal with, is attaching events to items, right? So for instance, if we wanted to do something whenever H2 or this particular H2 was clicked, the way that would work is we would do, test1 .on. Well, it would actually be .click and then function. Then we could say alert hello. All right, and so now if we click this, we get this nice little alert that says hello. And so looking at this, we can see, just like we discussed, here we're selecting the element that we want to mess with. .click is actually shorthand for, it used to be .on click, and we'll discuss on as well. You would use on for basically a whole host of other options that we would want to trigger events for, right? But instead now we could just think of, .click is gonna, whatever we pass it is gonna fire whenever the actual clicking happens, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and reload this as well. And so what's happening here is this right here, this function, and then the arguments there, and then this is called an anonymous function. This function doesn't actually have a name. In JavaScript, and then conversely, jQuery as well, we could say function hello world is alert hello. That's how we would do that. And then we could say, hello world. We could always reference that whenever we want. And then here you see that, okay, I went ahead and did that. But with this anonymous function, we don't actually give it a name. We're just passing this function as a callback to this so that, when this gets clicked, then that stuff gets fired. Another thing to note that's very common is, let's say these were these were links, right? We're going to switch these from H2s to A. We're also going to give them hrefs. Go ahead and save it in here. Now, one thing is, if we click on it, right? Actually, let's just go ahead and make these go somewhere to spice the example up a little bit. Google.com. Right? If we click that, we're going to go to Google. Okay. So one thing is, when we're looking at this with this callback, is another way that we can do this is we're going to fire this up here. We can also give it an argument, right? What tries to happen, or what Jquery tries to do, is it will try to pass our function an event object, which is a little bit more than we want to discuss in this video. But the main thing that we use this for is we can say, if we have our anonymous function accept the event object, we can call a function, or we can call a method of that event object, and we can say e.prevent default, and then we can do whatever we want here, right? So if we call it like this, then we notice that if we click here, it's going to say hello, and it's not going to go to Google. No matter what we do, it's not going to go to Google. Now, if we were to try to not have that prevent default, I'll give you an example here. When we do test2, click function, we're going to say alert hello. If we click here, it's going to say hello, but then after you get done clicking that, it's going to continue on doing whatever a link normally does in an HTML document. So that's when this is very common whenever we're dealing with links or forms or anything like that. This is extremely common. We would accept the event object, and we would do e.prevent default to prevent whatever that element was from doing what the browser thought its default behavior should be. Lastly, another really common thing that we would do with JavaScript here is we say this is input type equals text, ID equals test. I got too much stuff that says test here. Let's just say name. All right, and we're gonna throw some line breaks in here. We're gonna put in here. We're gonna change this to say hello. We're gonna give this the more default pound symbol, and we're gonna leave that the same. All right, so we're gonna go back to doing we're gonna throw another click event onto test1, but instead of alerting hello, we're gonna do hello, and then we are going to get this text value. And to do that, we would want to find what its ID is. So the ID is going to be name. We would use the same syntax we've used before with the $sign and all that. And we go .val. And what this does is it returns the value of whatever the input element that you're using is. So here I'm going to put John. Say hello, and here it says hello John. We can run this again. I'm going to say John Clem. I'm going to click say hello, and here it says hello John Clem. All right, so it's pulling in this information dynamically. So we can use this information. Let's say let's change this to number. And I'm going to put is the number greater than 4. Go ahead and save this out. And we're going to come back here and we're going to say we are going to still prevent default on this, right? But then we're going to say number equals number is greater than 4, we're going to alert yes, no. Okay, so we're introducing a new function here, which is parse int. JavaScript actually has a bunch of these: parse int, parse float, and basically you use these because JavaScript is not a strongly typed language, which is a bit outside of the scope of this video, but that is to say that if we have a variable that says 4, right, or especially if we're getting user input, we don't know if this is actually, well, in this we definitely did specify that this was the string 4. So we could say test is greater than 3 is true. Whereas if we did var test equals 4, test is greater than 3. Oops, if test is greater than 3, console.log. Greater than 5. It's false, I'm sorry. Yeah, obviously the greater than 3 wouldn't have done anything. So var test equals 4. Oops, let's put the string. We're say test is greater than 5 is false. We lucked out on that one, but you know, so there's all sorts of different situations where the type of this input may not be readily, you know, it may not be obvious, you know. So it's always good to make sure that you're communicating with JavaScript or making it in your code that you're not making any assumptions about what that value may be. So we have this. The way this works is just, you know, we attach to this click event. We're preventing default. We're saying that the number is going to be equal to the integer value of whatever was entered, and then here we say if number is greater than 4, we're going to alert yes. If it's not, we're going to go ahead and alert no. So a good example is here. Is 5 greater than 4? Parse int if here we see 5 is greater than 4. So we're going to go ahead and see why that happened. If test var number equals parse int name.value. If number is greater than 4. We may have had some different stuff going on here. So 4 is no. 1, no. Do 10, no. Okay, it's never there. So one thing we can do to debug that is, okay, so we got to see, and okay, that's good. So we actually found that it should not have been name, it should have been number. And you saw there that actually we doubled up on the click events, so we got 2 different answers. So now we're gonna redo this now that we have the proper name. We're gonna say 5. We're gonna go, is this greater than 4? It says yes, just as we would expect. 2. No, it is not. Okay. So that's a general overview of JavaScript and jQuery. Again, this kind of just touches the surface of what we would do. One thing that I do want to mention is what is also very common is after we have jQuery loaded, we would want to make sure that all of our code goes into a document.ready function tag. Basically, this is what we would want to start it out in. And the reason why is because this fires an event listener similar to how we just talked with click, and this only gets executed, the code that's inside of here only gets executed after the whole page is done loading. And this is extremely useful because it could be that, you know, for whatever reason, it's in here, it is in this example, it's harder to visualize this, but imagine that we have, you know, like our standard MVC code, and we may have, you know, all sorts of different files are getting included, and so we're not necessarily sure where in the rendered page our jQuery is going to get printed out. Well, if we were to try to do some stuff that attached an event listener onto an element, and that element did not exist in the page yet, it would not work. And so an example of that is, I'm going to go ahead and put this back in the head here. I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to do script. Move these over. Alright, and then for this example, I'm going to say, well, I'm just going to go ahead and put this code that we've been working on here, right? So we're going to say test dot yada yada yada. We're going to go ahead and save this. We're going to get rid of this as well. And now what's going to happen is, I'm going to go ahead and load the page. I'm going to try to do what we've been doing, and it's actually it's not going to work because this this element does not exist on the page yet, wherever we're calling this. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh. I'm going to say 55. We notice we get nothing, right? However, if I come here and I go document.ready, go ahead and paste this out. Oops, I messed that up, but okay. Bring this out here, save it out, refresh. We're going to say 555, and it says yes, right? Even though this is above where all of this stuff is, it's still going to work because we've used this document.ready. So it just basically, it loads this up, but it queues it. It doesn't execute it until finally after we get the last element on the page, and then that gets executed. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment, shoot me an email, and thanks for watching.